Good evening, everyone. I'm Chelsea Ohlemiller with Happiness, Hope, and Harsh Realities live series, Grief and Goodbyes. And tonight I have an award-winning author and just a really inspiration in the widowed parent space. I have Jenny Lisk, and I am just super honored for her to be here tonight to answer your questions, to share her advice and her expertise with everybody. And I want to remind you that all of her links for everything that you'll hear tonight and anything that you might want to do will be in the comment section. And I also want to make sure that we will be reading your comments, anything, put it in there for us to read tonight. So thank you, Jenny, for being here. And if you want to just start out a little bit, tell us a little bit about your story, what led you here.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, Chelsea. I'm so excited to be here. I've been looking forward to this all week. It's
Yes, me
great.
too.
Yeah, great way to start my Wednesday night here. Hey, and we're already getting some comments in the chat, so that's awesome. Hey, everyone.
Yes.
So as you mentioned, I got to hold up my
And I
book
didn't
here
even
for
say
you.
the name of your book. I have to say,
Yeah.
like, sometimes I get nervous when I'm meeting people that like really inspire me. Tonight, I'm
Uh,
like one of those, you know how when you meet somebody and you're just like, their work is really important. I don't know if you get like this, but then you're like, what did I just say? That's me tonight. I have like sometimes I get little butterflies, and that's me. So
no, hey,
Jenny
it's all
is,
good.
like I said, an award-winning author. Her book is Future Widow, and we
Here's
will be
There we
talking
go.
about it. I have the electronic version, so mine's not as pretty to hold up and show.
Yeah.
So, but yes, her book is Future Widow, and we'll actually be sharing an incredible sale that she will be having. I'll remind you all at the end, but next week, the Kindle version of her book is only 99 cents for a very limited time. So if you have the, Kindle and you have that app, anybody can use it. And 99 cents is an absolute steal for this book. So we'll remind you, and we'll put the links in how to get that tonight. But yeah, so back to you, Jenny.
Thanks.
Tell us a
Yeah.
little bit about
Yeah,
yourself.
yeah. No, that's great. Thanks for sharing that. I was gonna say, this is the first time it's ever been discounted like this. It's normally $10 for the ebook, and it's because it's Children's Grief Awareness Month. I decided to just go all out and try to get the book into as many hands as possible because you've probably seen the news. There's 120,000 kids now, just in this country, who have a dead parent or primary caregiver from the pandemic.
Yes.
Right? So we've got all the kids who are grieving, every year there's people who lose, kids, teenagers, they lose a mom or a dad to illnesses and accidents and suicides and all kinds of terrible things. And we have all the pandemic deaths on top of that.
Yes.
So I realized that, this is a great time to try to get some resources into the hands of their parents, hopefully.
Absolutely.
Because as it turns out, like, the surviving parent is really key to helping those kids, in the long term. So,
Absolutely.
but I think you asked me to introduce myself. So
Yeah,
sorry, I jumped
but
right
back to
into
your
like,
book, I have to say, if you don't want to take my word for this book and the inspiration and the hope that it provides, then I just have to say that on Katie Couric's wake up call email, this book was mentioned today by Katie Couric on her email. So if you don't trust me, there's somebody else that has much better, rateability up there than me. It's her. So
yeah, thank you. I almost fell off my chair this morning. I was like running around my house saying, "What?" Like,
yeah. Yeah. And then you wonder why I have like butterflies trying to talk to you tonight. It's like, oh my
oh,
gosh.
come on. No, hey, we're just sitting here chatting, right? Too bad we're not together. We could actually be having a cup of coffee or
I
whatever
know.
and
I
hanging
have
out.
coffee, decaf here, but
Oh, I've got a big old thing of water, so,
there you go.
but, yeah, okay, so my book is called Future Widow, and, um, well, so obviously, spoiler alert, I became a widow, right? Now I'm a widowed parent. My husband had glioblastoma, which is a very, very aggressive kind of brain cancer. And it was 6 years ago right now, actually, which is crazy to think of that we were going through this. And, I say 6 years. At the same time, it seems like 20 years ago,
Mhm.
and also like, a year and a half ago, right?
Right.
Like, time is just weird. But, we were busy family, right? We had an 8-year-old, a 10-year-old, normal life, right? Everything was great. And then he started feeling a little dizzy. right? Dizzy. I mean, okay, dehydrated, tired. I mean, who knows, right? You don't hear, oh, I'm a little dizzy and jump to, I'm going to be a widowed parent this time
Right.
next year, right? That's just you. So, and he wasn't passing out and anything dramatic. So you can imagine how shocked I was. He called his primary care doctor, blah, blah, blah. The primary care doctor looks at the MRI and says, there's something really wrong with your brain. You need to go see the neurosurgeon tomorrow. Things don't usually happen that fast, right?
Right.
So the next day we're in the neurosurgeon's office and he looks at the MRI and he says, we're doing brain surgery the following day. And, I've had knee surgeries and wrist surgeries, and things don't usually happen that fast, right?
Right.
So this was a whole new world, and it was the start of 8 months. He was sick, and, in less than a year's time, my kids were going to have a dead dad, and I was going to be a widowed parent.
Right.
And I didn't sign up for that, right? I didn't know how to do that, right? Up to that point, I'd been a parent, right? So you got normal kid stuff.
Right.
Now you throw in grief, single parenting, whole new world, right? Like how do I do this?
Yeah.
And so he died, and when he died they were 9 and 11, and I felt lost. But I realized I couldn't be the only one feeling lost, the only widowed parent, right? Like if I'm feeling this way, there are other people like me who are also feeling this way.
Right.
So I should do something about this. So I decided that a podcast would be a really accessible way to go out and talk to people, interview them, and share what I was learning with other people like me who were probably also looking for answers, information, and to feel less alone. So that's how it started. And, it was 3 years ago right now because it was Children's Grief Awareness Month of 2018. So November of 2018 is when it started, and it's really crazy to think that it's been 3 years since I started the podcast. It's called the Widowed Parent Podcast, and so my listeners are mostly widowed parents, and every week I try to bring them resources and information and stuff that would be helpful to them through that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say that through the podcast, your book, your website, it is full of resources for not only, parents that find themselves in that position where now they're a single parent, but also I found tons of resources for my own children that I could help. Obviously their grief is immensely different with the grief of a grandparent and not a parent, but there was still so much on there that I myself have not used yet or implemented, in my own children's grief journey. And so I think that anybody that's listening could benefit from those resources because you have an immense amount of knowledge, information, and encouragement posted there.
Well, thank you. Good. Yeah. It's over 3 years, you end up building up quite a lot of content and, and stuff. Yeah. Periodically reorganize my website so that people can find things. And
no, it's wonderful. It's absolutely wonderful. And again, I will put all of this in the comment section, so it's super easy for you guys to find. But I want to ask you how do you manage telling children hard things? So that's the start of it. Grief starts, I think, not at the loss, but when a loss is coming. And so at least that's been my experience. And so what are your, when people reach out to you, what are your recommendations for, okay, we have this hard thing, now we have to tell our children, or do you tell your children,
Right.
How do you approach that? Either through your advice to others or the way that you handled it?
Sure. That's a really good question and an important one because it's one of those things where it feels like, how do I do this? I could screw this up. Maybe, everything's going to be a disaster if I do this the wrong way. Maybe it will or maybe it won't, but it feels that way, right? Mm-hmm. And especially some fundamental questions like, do I tell them the truth? Do I not tell them the truth? Like that feels binary, right?
Right.
Like, especially if it's something difficult, like if someone dies by suicide, right? A lot of people wonder, is it better to tell them the truth or does it protect them to not tell them the truth, right? And it's a really hard question. And it's also hard to know who can advise you on that question, right? So this was really one of the most important, I think, fascinating things I've learned from my guests on the show. um, is this question of how important it is really to be honest with kids, even about difficult topics. And I interviewed a woman named Lauren Schneider, and she works at Our House Grief Support Center in Los Angeles. She's the first person I've heard this from, but I've heard it many, many. I mean, it is very well known in the field that it is very important to be honest with kids. Um, and it's sorry, I'm seeing the questions and it's
Oh
throwing
yeah,
me
no,
off
no,
here. No, no,
it
no,
does the
it's good.
same to me. I knew exactly what you were doing.
Yeah. Uh, here's how Lauren explained it. Kids are smart and kids are perceptive, right? And kids generally will know if people aren't being honest with them, if something doesn't quite add up, if there's something going on and adults are telling them one thing, but then when they walk into a room, all the adults get real quiet because there's some they're not letting on. And oftentimes they will create a situation in their mind that's maybe even worse than whatever the truth
Right,
is, right? And the other thing is, kids will eventually find out.
right,
Maybe they eventually find out because, when they get to some age, you decide to tell them yourself. Maybe they eventually find out because they overhear something on the playground from other kids. Maybe it's maybe the however the person died was covered in the newspaper or something, and they Google and they find something, right? Like kids eventually find out,
right,
and when they find out, what they also realize if that surviving parent didn't tell them the truth, they realize that too. And then that is really problematic for that trust. The bond of trust is so important between the surviving parent and the kids.
yeah,
Both for its own sake, the kid needs to know they have this parent in their corner, they can trust them. And also because that trust in that relationship forms the pattern for future trusting, close, intimate relationships that kid might end up, if it's with a future partner or
right,
future friends or colleagues or other people that they want to have, trusting relationships with. That it actually creates a problem if that bond of trust is somehow broken with that surviving parent, because of telling them, for example, that their parent died of a heart attack when they actually died by suicide,
right,
right? So that kind of thing. So it is important to be honest with them. Now, depending on the age of the kid, they might have more questions or less questions. They might understand more or less. You can use accurate but plain language if they're young, and then as they get older, fill in more details. And it's not like you're going to sit down and give a whole academic dissertation to a 2-year-old or something, right?
right,
But it's not hiding. It's a little bit like with adoption. A long, long time ago, people didn't used to tell kids that they were adopted. And maybe it was a secret forever, or maybe they would sit them down when they were an adult and say, "We have big news. We need to tell you you were adopted." And then it shatters their understanding of who they were because they had they've been lied to their whole life, right?
right,
And so now, and my kids we adopted both of our kids, so I've been, in this world, and the kind of advice now is to, um, it never becomes like a thing that you tell them. It's just always part of their story,
right,
right? So my kids were infants when we got them, and they've always known that they were adopted. And it wasn't like, you sit down someday and you tell them, right? So it's kind of like that. It's another, example of a conversation that could be difficult that you want to be open and honest about.
right. Absolutely. And I absolutely agree with you. I think that sometimes we try to, shield them from pain when really there really is no shielding from the pain.
Right.
And so although the truth can sometimes be so hard and you really have to be courageous to deliver that news, ultimately that will be the beginning of a path that's built upon a foundation, of
Right.
trust and truth.
Well, yeah, and one way to think of it is this, there's really no good way to tell your kid that the other parent has died or is going to die, or that they died in some way that you'd rather not talk about. There's not there's no way that you can like make that a nice discussion, or you know what I mean?
Right, right,
But
exactly.
but you can make the whole thing worse if you add a lie on top of. You have this
Yep,
terrible situation, and you can make it worse by lying on top of it,
Right.
you
And
know?
you think you're doing the right thing, but really it's complicating things. So at the
Right.
end, really the best thing to do is just deliver the truth and
Right.
in the simplest way and the most compassionate way that you can,
Yeah. And, the then depending on the kid and the age and whatever, they're probably gonna ask questions. They might ask questions that don't have answers or that you don't know answers to, right?
Yep.
Like, if they ask some they might ask some questions, if the person has cancer and they ask something about how cancer works or whatever, sometimes you can say, "I don't know, but let's go look that up. Let's learn together," if they're interested, right, in
Yep.
learning something about how cancer works in the body or something. Sometimes it's a question like, "Is dad's cancer going to spread?" Or, something where you don't know because you're waiting, so you can explain, "We know this and this. We don't know this and this and this. We're waiting for, we're gonna meet with the doctor again, next week, and you'll be the first one to know what the doctor says."
Yeah.
So you can kind of like, it's okay not to have all the answers, right?
Right.
As long as you're kind of talking it through. And then there's other questions like, why did dad have to die? Right?
Mm.
Like, that doesn't have an answer, right?
Right.
Like,
Those are the ones that hit you straight in the gut.
right. But then instead of like saying, "Oh, I don't want that question, so let me shy away from the conversation,"
Right.
like, I think it's helpful to look for an emotion that you can connect with. It's underneath the question. Like, why did dad have to die? I don't know. It sucks. It's unfair.
Mhm.
You know, this is hard for me. How is this for you?
Right.
And see if they're willing to talk about their experience about it. Because it's not like they're really asking, like, why did he have to die? Well, maybe they are asking, but there's obviously not an answer.
Right.
Right. So, but if you can find some piece of the emotion you can connect around, and asking
Absolutely.
them to share how their experience of this is. And the other thing is, then they might talk about it, which is great because then you're having an open discussion, or they might not talk about it. They might say, "I don't want to talk about it," or "Go away," or "This is a dumb question," or whatever, which is fine too, because you're letting them know that the door is open
Right.
to this topic. A lot of times kids don't want to bring up stuff or they don't want to ask a question because they're afraid of upsetting, the other parent,
Yep.
and or they want to somehow protect the parent, right? and
Mhm.
and so as a parent, being conscious of like, I need to look for ways to send the message that the door's open, and maybe they don't want to talk today, and that's fine, and maybe they don't want to talk tomorrow or next week, but sometime they're going to decide, they're ready to talk about it. And I've been consistently sending the message that, the topics aren't off limits. And
Absolutely.
so sending that message just in and of itself is important, whether or not they want to talk about it in any particular time.
Yes. And we've done that. At first I thought for my own, personal journey and losing my mother, there was a very short time where I hid my grief from my kids,
Mm,
and then my husband said, listen, this is never going to go away. So you need to grieve authentically in front of them so they feel like they can.
yeah.
And then at first I thought, how am I supposed to teach them to grieve authentically and openly in a world that really doesn't want to see grief and
Mm,
pain and heartbreak? But
mm,
then I realized, and I don't know if I'm sure in working with children that you've seen this too, but kids are so beautiful and open with each other. They are just
mm.
comfortable. And I can't tell you how many times my own children have said, oh, at recess today, I was missing Meme. And so my friend sat down and she said, oh my goodness, my grandmother has passed away too. Or,
Uh,
and they openly are talking about their grief. Sometimes I feel like better than we do as adults,
yeah.
because they don't know you know, the shame that might come from it, or the embarrassment, or the uncomfortableness that sometimes it brings. And so I found that was such a beautiful thing. And it kind of reminded me to be more authentic, because kids are naturally authentic with each other and open
Yeah.
and want to hear each other's stories.
Yeah.
And so I think that's such an important thing, is just to have that door open and that safe space where they can, talk to us, talk to other, friends or family members, but for them to know that it's okay to ask those tough questions.
Yeah.
Because I think if like you said, if you either, aren't really honest at the beginning, they're probably not going to keep coming back. But certainly if you say, let's bake cookies instead, or I don't really want to talk about that right now. Well, then they're not going to keep coming back to you, And so I think that's important to keep that open.
Right. And, maybe there could be other difficult topics throughout the rest of their childhood and life that you want to encourage them hopefully to talk to you about, right? I mean, you never know.
Absolutely.
And so by setting a pattern early on that we can talk about difficult topics, that could help with who knows what, may come up down the road.
Yes, absolutely. And I see a question on here from Amy. And I also want to remind you guys, if you have questions and we haven't seen them, make sure you put them in the comments again. And any questions that you have for Jenny tonight, put them down so that we can hopefully get to them. So Amy says, my question is, when it began with, what do you do when a spouse who doesn't want to discuss the loss openly?
That's a tricky one.
Yeah.
And in my case, my husband's brain cancer, he was cognitively confused. And so that wasn't really, an issue in our situation. He knew that he had cancer and brain cancer and was dying, but he was constantly, confused about that. I think, in general, if it wasn't that situation, I would suggest getting with a therapist, family therapist, and particularly someone who knows and specializes in children's grief, and talking about how you as a family can approach talking with the children about this and talking through, the ramifications if you do, if you don't, like if the spouse who's the ill one is concerned, figuring out what their concerns are and figuring out if you can come up with some plan. It may be that if maybe they don't know, never occurred to them. How would it, right? I didn't know any of this stuff before I got involved in this.
Right.
The fact, how grief affects children, and so maybe having some discussions about that with a grief specialist might help them see, like, oh, it's really is important to talk about, if they have a little more information on that. And there are really terrific kids and family grief programs in many, many communities in this country and other places too. And in fact, the National Alliance for Children's Grief, which is at childrengrieve.org, has a thing where you can go on there and go in your state, and then you can look by different cities and find grief programs. And so that would be a great place to start, and call up one of those, centers and talk to somebody about your particular situation, challenges, what you're trying to navigate, and see if they can help you come up with, a way to navigate that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think my only advice would be the exact same thing, to find somebody that can help you both navigate and come to, a consensus of the best way to handle it. And also maybe just start with, why can we not discuss this openly? Or, what's your thought process behind that? Because it might be deeply rooted in some, pain or fear that you haven't discussed yet, and it hasn't been brought up. And so,
Right.
maybe
Right.
start that conversation and then go from there. But yeah, that's exactly what I would say. So
It is helpful to try to find someone who's knowledgeable about children's grief.
absolutely.
And a lot of times the grief centers, in your city, if, they may or may not end up working with your family, but they probably know the people they can recommend. If some grief centers have both therapy and group programs, or individual programs and group programs, but some centers only really have group programs, and it may be that your family needs like an individual therapist and they don't offer that. So they think they usually keep a list of people they can refer to who would, be knowledgeable about children's grief,
Absolutely.
and be able to have those kind of discussions.
Yes. And another thing is, a lot of times people will say, oh, well, my kids are fine. Like they don't need anything. But like, people were shocked. We did play therapy with our children after my mother passed. We did through grief and play therapy. And our children were, quote unquote, fine, or acting fine, or recovering and resilient, and all those things people say about children. But we said, we were being proactive about it. We want to, really let them work through that loss. And so, people can look normal or fine, or however the world defines them. But, it's just great to have those resources and to have extra, minds and hearts that are helping the people that you love. And so
Yeah.
it was a great resource for our family.
Well, so yeah, I'm really glad to hear that. That's really terrific. And you know what it's reminding me of? Um, Here's what I think. Grief support for kids is like swimming lessons. So now you're saying, what is she talking about, right?
Yeah.
You don't wait until your kid is drowning to sign them up for swimming lessons,
Oh.
right? You go
Mm,
ahead and proactively sign them up for swimming lessons because you want them to have some skills to equip them to navigate their life, which might involve water at various points in their life, right?
yeah.
So grief support, I think it's easy to say, okay, my kid's parent died. How do I know if they need quote unquote grief support? Do I need to wait until there's some threshold of problem or something that then we go, okay, well, now we need support?
Right.
I think that's really not the most helpful way to look at it. I think you say, you know what? My kids have had this loss. If grief support is like swimming lessons, if I can, there, these grief centers and stuff that I mentioned, they have terrific programming that helps equip kids with skills for integrating their grief into their life in healthy ways, right? And being with their peers who have a loss, who understand, and all that stuff, and it helps equip them kind of proactively with skills for healthy grieving, which could help them with their current loss, also maybe for other, more people will unfortunately die in their lives at different points, in a 90-year life, you're going to lose a lot of people at various points. And so having some grief, skills, I think is helpful. So that's why I say grief support is like swimming lessons. And I
Yeah,
think
that's
that thinking,
great. I've never heard it like that before, but it makes so much sense. I mean, it really helps people, visualize the need and how helpful it can be. Absolutely. And so I want to also talk about, because it is Children's Grief Awareness Month, Jenny on her website and through some of her friends and colleagues are doing a big giveaway. And
mm,
so, will you tell us a little bit about that so that my viewers can have a chance? It ends Friday, so you guys need to get on it and be quick. But tell us how they can sign up for that giveaway.
yeah, absolutely. And I just wanted to say in the chat, I think someone asked me to repeat the group about grief for children. So the National Alliance for Children's Grief, childrengrieve.org, has where you can go and search in different states and cities to look for programs. So I'd
And
encourage you
I'll
guys
put
to.
that link in the comment section so that it's easy for you guys to find.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah. Okay, so you asked about the giveaway. So, like you said, it's Children's Grief Awareness Month. So this week I'm doing a giveaway with 5 books that I put together a package that I thought would be really interesting for widowed parents. So there's 2 workbook type things and 3 books. And so one of the workbooks, well, actually, it's from the National Alliance for Children's Grief. It's called When Someone Dies, and it's a child caregiver activity book. So it's more for, like grade school age, younger kids. And then from the Dougie Center, which is in Portland, Oregon, they have a teen journal that's called Deconstruction Reconstruction. So that's a journal for teens. The Dougie Center is a terrific organization, and they have a lot of resources on their website as well. And then the 3 books. So one of them is called Never the Same by Donna Sherman. And so that really is a deep dive into understanding the perspectives of kids who have early parent loss. So that's a good one for the parents to read. And then Past and Present by Alison Gilbert. So this is kind of for the whole family.
Mhm.
I mean, it's not a kid's workbook or anything, but it's all about remembering our lost loved ones and creative and interesting ways to do that. And so it's broken up into all these different ideas, and so you can dip in and out and come up with ideas, something either you can do or you can do together with your kids, or some of them are project based, like having a loved one's recipe like in their handwriting put onto a platter for cookies or something, like
Mhm.
so it's ways to incorporate people's memories,
Yeah.
right? And so the kids learn the stories of their parent and they don't, forget. So Past and Present. And then the last book, of course, is my book, Future Widow. And so it's a memoir. But I've specifically worked in information on children's grief and the things that I wish I had known or done differently. The things, a lot of it is the stuff I've learned through the podcast later after he
Right.
died in the last 3 years here. And I'm like, oh, if I had known that, 6 years ago when we were going through this, that would have really been helpful. So I wanted to, I didn't want the book just to be like, here's my story, I hope you like it.
Right.
right? It's like, here's my story, and I'm using that to tell, to weave in these layers of hopefully helping people feel less lost than I was, or more equipped, giving them some practical ideas that will help them, with that journey. So that's the fifth book in the giveaway. And like you said, it goes through Friday night at 11 p.m. Pacific is when it ends. And if you go to jennylisk.com/giveaway, it's super easy. You can enter there, and you can get extra entries by, following us on Instagram and all these good things.
Yes, and it'll be easy for you guys because all the links will be in the comments section for her social media, and for the giveaway specifically, I'll put a special link in for that. So you guys will have an easy time finding all of those.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Yeah, no, I'm really excited about that, and I'm really thrilled that these other 4 authors wanted to be part of it, because Children's Grief Awareness Month is really an important time to raise awareness. I mean, I think I started out by saying 120,000 kids now in the US have a dead parent or primary caregiver from the pandemic, and that's just shocking.
I can't even, I mean,
that's a lot of kids.
Yeah, I can't even comprehend that number and that heartbreak. I just can't even.
Yeah. Well, here's another statistic for you, and this is pre-pandemic. This is in a normal, grief time. I'm not sure what the numbers are, when you add in the pandemic impacts, but Judy's House in Denver does research every year on the numbers and the prevalence of childhood bereavement, right? So what they have concluded is that nationally, 1 in 14 kids, by the time they turn 18, will have lost a parent or sibling.
Oh my God.
Like, that's a lot of kids. And and then they break down the numbers by state too. So I believe West Virginia is the highest, and it's 1 out of 8 or 9 kids.
Gosh.
Where I am in Washington, it's 1 in, I think, 17. I mean, that's a lot of, so sometime throughout their childhood, teenage and childhood years, they'll lose a parent or sibling. That's a lot of grieving kids.
Yeah. That's a statistic that not many people are aware of. I mean, myself included, and one that really knocks the wind out of you.
Yeah. And it's why the topic is important, and it's why, I was going to say I'm glad we have this month. I wish we didn't need this month.
Right.
But because we need it, I'm glad that we do have it, because I think it's important, to raise awareness and try to provide some tools and resources and information. And, I think it's an important topic, and I'm glad to see that the media has been covering it some, talking about, with the pandemic, of course, grief is a much more top of mind topic for probably everybody,
right?
Than it. I mean, we've always had people dying of many things, but a lot of time I was able to mostly ignore it for years, right, until my husband got cancer, right?
Right.
So yeah, now it's if we can bring some attention to this topic, then I think that'll be a good thing.
Yes, absolutely. So, well, I just really appreciate your time, but I want to end by asking, so you've been on this grief journey for years now, and you just, you mentioned a couple of times tonight that, things you wish you would have known or things you would have done differently. And so if you had to leave everybody that's watching with, 1 or 2 pieces of either encouragement, advice, something you wish you knew, something that helped you in your grief journey, like I said, everybody that's watching sadly has this collective, grief and loss within their lives. And so what would you say to those people?
Yeah. Well, I think we've covered a lot of the really important points about being honest with kids. I mean, that's a really number one thing to keep top of mind. And then how important it is to seek out those grief support swimming lessons. And I think beyond that, I would say to recognize that you're really not alone. Maybe it seems like it, but it's really worthwhile to try to connect with other people who, are younger, widowed people who still are raising their kids in their teens. And if you have a different type of loss, to connect with people with that, similar type of loss or situation or age group or whatever, whatever your particular situation is. there's a lot more of us out there than, once you start looking, you're like, oh, wow, you find people, everywhere you can connect with. And one of the reasons that I mentioned the grief centers is because that is a great way too to connect with other people, right? If you go to a center and they have a group for kids and teens and parents, well, now everyone in your family is connecting with peers, who can get it, which is great to have. And it is great to recognize that, there are other people who have been down this path. There are other people on this path now. I hope, people who are listening to your show, they've probably heard a lot of, your guests have come on, you talk to them, they've maybe hear other people's stories, and that helps too, to feel a little bit less alone, connect with people that way. There's a ton of Facebook groups. Actually, there's a Facebook group, if anybody who's listening is a younger widow or widower of COVID. There's a group, I think it's called Young Widows and Widowers of COVID-19. Specifically a Facebook group for people who've lost, a loved one during the pandemic and are raising kids, to connect with others with that particular circumstance. So it's really worth it to seek out. Oh, another good example is Camp Widow, which you might be thinking, camping, widowing, like, it's not camping. It's basically a widow conference, but that sounds boring because it's not at all boring. So Camp Widow is a much cooler name, but it takes place every year in San Diego, and then they also do one in Toronto and in Florida. And speakers and get-togethers, and they do like a dance party on Saturday night, and they have stuff, and it's awesome.
I actually have a friend that's been to the one in Florida.
Oh, good. Yeah, good. I went to the one in San Diego, and like everybody there gets it. Maybe everybody's story is a little different, but everyone, and it's actually fun too. You might say, okay, well, if I go to Camp Widow, am I going to sit in the, I don't know, Hilton or whatever it is for 3 days and cry?
Right.
No, right?
Right.
I mean, you might cry at some things and people won't look at you like you're weird or anything.
Right.
And you might laugh at other things, and you might learn interesting things at other points and just connect with people, and it's awesome. So I guess it's a very long way of illustrating my point that recognizing that you're not alone and kind of proactively going out and looking for people to connect with really is helpful, and I think important.
Yeah. Find your people, find your support system, wherever that might be, people that, have experienced the same thing. Yes. Well, I am just super excited and so honored to have you tonight on the show. And everybody check out her podcast, her website, her book, Future Widow. And just thank you guys for watching. And do not forget, all of her links will be in the comment section. But next week, it hasn't started yet, but next week, 99 cents for the Kindle version of Future Widow, which has never happened, I think, right?
And actually, it's all the ebooks. It's not just Kindle. It's Apple Books, perfect. Google Books, Kobo, Nook. All the retailers that have ebooks are all going to have it at 99 cents next week.
Perfect. Yes. So there you go.
Yeah.
So, well, thank you so much. Thank you guys for being here. If there's any comments we missed, I will make sure that we hit those after we're done here tonight. But I just want to shout out to, let me see, Amy, Barb. I hope I'm not missing people. I'm just trying to scroll through. Debbie, Pat, Candace, Fiona. I hope I've mentioned everybody. But thank you guys for being here, and good night.
Thank you, Chelsea. This